The door burst open, and a sharp gasp filled the small, cramped office restroom. The music from the party outside was loud, but it seemed distant now. In the narrow stall stood Lisa, her eyes wide with terror. Her husband, Grant, stood in the doorway, shock and heartbreak twisting his face. He was not supposed to be there. This was her office party. This was her private moment to unwind, or so she thought. But in a single second, everything she had tried to keep hidden came crashing down. There, beside her, were her boss and two other male colleagues. Everyone looked guilty, half-dressed, and scared. The air was heavy with the odor of alcohol and regret. Grant's face was pale, his eyes red, as if he could not believe the scene in front of him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. A low tremor escaped his throat, something between a sob and a roar of anger. Lisa had never seen such pain in anyone's eyes, especially not in the eyes of the man she had promised to love and honor for the rest of her life. She tried to speak, but her words disappeared before they could form. She felt cold. She felt ashamed. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it would burst. All her secrets were now out in the open. There was no going back. The event that followed, the raw devastation on Grant's face, the trembling of her colleagues, and the hush that settled over the hallway when other employees noticed something was wrong. These became echoes that would haunt Lisa. She stood there, exposed. Her marriage, her life as she knew it, shattered in a single horrifying instant. Lisa had been married to Grant for 6 years. They met in college at a poetry reading that neither of them really wanted to attend. Yet, when they struck up a conversation afterward, they found each other interesting and sincere. Their first dates were not extravagant. They would just watch a movie, share popcorn, and talk about their dreams. It was simple and beautiful. Grant was the kind of man who believed in small acts of kindness. He would leave little notes for Lisa, reminding her how special she was to him. He loved surprising her with handmade gifts. Though he never had a lot of money, he poured his heart into their relationship. Lisa loved his gentle spirit, how he would listen to her talk about her day for hours without complaint. She also admired his ability to handle stress with patience. When they got married, they moved into a modest apartment. Lisa soon found a good job at a growing marketing firm. She was ambitious and driven. She wanted to climb the corporate ladder, and she worked hard, often doing long hours. Grant cheered her on, even when that meant spending a lot of time alone at home. He could see how passionate she was about her career. For a while, everything seemed perfect. They were not rich, but they were happy. They spoke of starting a family, traveling, and maybe buying a little house. But life has a way of introducing problems when people least expect it. Lisa found herself under the mentorship of Mr. Evans, a senior manager at her company. He noticed her potential and helped her secure a series of promotions. In the process, she found herself under more pressure than ever. Mr. Evans had a strong personality. He praised Lisa for her work, but he also made it clear that he was attracted to her. At first, she brushed off his comments. She loved Grant and had no intention of being unfaithful. But as the projects piled up and Mr. Evans continued to flatter her, a tiny spark of vanity grew inside Lisa. She liked the attention. She was a rising star, and not only her boss, but also a few of her male colleagues admired her confidence and ability. Meanwhile, Grant was working at a local repair shop. The money was not great, but it was steady. Over time, he noticed Lisa coming home later and later. Sometimes she was distant, lost in thought, or texting with her colleagues long into the night. She always had an excuse. We have a big campaign, or it's crunch time, you know how it is. Grant tried to be supportive, but he could feel them drifting apart. Late one evening, Lisa came home smelling of perfume, not just her usual fragrance, but something else, layered in the air around her. She rushed to the shower without saying much. Grant asked if something happened at work. She gave him a quick answer about being in a stuffy conference room, said she was exhausted, and changed the subject. It seemed normal enough, at least on the surface, but inside, Grant felt a strange pang in his chest. He dismissed it, blaming his own overthinking. The days turned to weeks, and the tension in their marriage grew. Lisa felt that Grant did not understand her ambitions. She became impatient with his questions. He found her sudden shortness with him confusing. The gap between them widened with each unspoken worry and each forced smile. Then, the company's annual party arrived. It was supposed to be a grand occasion: food, music, dancing, and networking. Lisa had been excited about it all month. She bought a new dress and made an appointment to get her hair done. Grant was invited too, but she told him it might be better if he just let her handle the socializing. "These office parties can be long and boring for outsiders," she said. "I'll just go for a couple of hours, have some fun, and come home." Grant trusted her and agreed to stay home. That night, Lisa went to the party, thinking it would be a chance to celebrate her latest successful project. People congratulated her, patted her on the back, and offered her drinks. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew loud and loose. Music thumped, laughter spilled out of every corner, and alcohol flowed freely. Mr. Evans, with a whiskey in hand, pulled Lisa aside. He thanked her for her hard work, for always being available, and for bringing so many good ideas to the team. A few of her male co-workers chimed in with compliments. She felt a surge of pride, and also a rush of something else. Maybe it was the drinks or the flattery, but she felt more alive than she had in a long time. When Mr. Evans invited her to step into the hallway, away from the noise, Lisa followed. She was feeling lightheaded, her face flushed from the alcohol. She glanced at her phone and noticed a missed call from Grant, but she tucked it away, telling herself she would call him back soon. In the hallway, Mr. Evans introduced her to two other men from the firm. They all joked, teased, and showered her with praise. It might have been the music, the tension in the air, or the rush of being so admired, but at some point, Lisa found herself in the office restroom with them, whispering and giggling. One minute, they were talking about harmless things like marketing strategies. The next minute, boundaries were blurred. She was flirting and letting them get too close. The taste of guilt was on her tongue, but she shoved it aside, thinking that this was just a bit of fun. By the time she realized how far she had gone, she felt trapped in a whirlwind of bad decisions. Standing there with her boss and colleagues, she knew it was wrong. She knew her husband was at home, trusting her. Yet part of her could not walk away from the attention. That was the moment Grant, driven by suspicion and a fearful curiosity, decided to come to the party to surprise her. He walked in, asked a few people if they had seen Lisa, and noticed Mr. Evans and two other men going into the restroom. Grant's heart pounded. Something inside him told him to check. He pushed open the door, and in his worst nightmare made real, he saw Lisa in a moment of betrayal. It was all he needed to see. His entire world caved in. In the days that followed, Lisa felt as if she was living in a dark, lonely fog. Grant packed a small suitcase and left their apartment. He stayed with a close friend, refusing to speak with her. She tried calling him, sending him messages, apologizing, and begging him to come home. The only reply she received was from his friend, who asked her to stop disturbing Grant until he was ready. Lisa went to work, but her eyes were dull, and she could not concentrate. The entire office buzzed with gossip. She could hear people whisper behind her back. Mr. Evans tried to check on her, but she brushed him away, blaming him for encouraging such behavior. Her mind was a storm of regret. The same scene played over and over in her head, Grant's face contorted by shock and betrayal. At the end of that terrible week, Lisa found a legal envelope in the mail. It was from Grant's lawyer, stating he intended to file for divorce. She stared at those papers for a long time, tears rolling down her cheeks. She signed for them, her hand shaking so violently she could hardly hold the pen. After that, she curled up on the sofa and sobbed until she had no tears left. The next few days were the darkest of her life. She could not eat. She barely slept. She felt like every breath was too heavy. She blamed herself for being weak and selfish. She began to think that the world would be better off without her. On one especially painful night, she sat alone in the living room, the lights off, with a handful of sleeping pills in her hand. She felt certain that ending her life was the only way to escape the shame. But then she remembered how Grant used to smile at her in the morning, how he would rush to make her coffee with just the right amount of cream and sugar. She remembered the time he stayed up all night nursing her when she had the flu, and how he whispered comforting words until she fell asleep. She thought of the promises they made when they stood at the altar. She dropped the pills and broke down in tears again. She realized that even if Grant could never forgive her, she still had to find a way to live, to learn from her mistakes. Lisa reached out to her best friend, Carla, who had known her since high school. Carla listened patiently as Lisa poured out her regrets and confessed all the details of that awful night. There were no excuses to be made. Lisa owned up to her actions. Carla scolded her for the betrayal, but she also encouraged her to seek professional help. Lisa booked a few therapy sessions to help her cope and understand why she had let herself sink to such a low. At therapy, Lisa admitted that she had always sought approval from others. She had grown up in a family where her father was distant and her mother was obsessed with social standing. Lisa never felt truly valued for who she was. In her marriage, Grant's love was pure, but it was different from the flashy attention she got at work. She realized she had allowed herself to be tempted by her boss and colleagues because it made her feel powerful and wanted in ways she had not experienced. It was twisted and wrong, but that was the root of it. Little by little, Lisa began to see that she had a choice to make. She could either give up on her life or she could fight for it. She could also try to make amends, whether Grant took her back or not. The first step was to become someone deserving of respect. She wrote a long letter to Grant, apologizing without begging, acknowledging that she would respect whatever decision he chose. She mentioned she was going to therapy. She said she understood that forgiveness was not guaranteed, but she would live her life in a way that honored the love they once shared, even if he did not want her anymore. Grant received the letter. He read it, put it aside, and read it again the next day. Part of him was still furious. Part of him felt crushed. A small, persistent part of him, however, remembered how much he loved Lisa. They had good years together. They had dreams and promises. He could not simply erase those memories, though he was not sure he could forgive her. A few weeks passed, and the divorce process continued. Lisa found a small place to rent because she could no longer afford their shared apartment. She told Grant he could keep it, though it was not entirely up to her. She was willing to let everything go if it meant he could find some peace. Whenever she felt weak, she reminded herself that actions would speak louder than words. She started volunteering at a local community center on weekends, helping kids with reading and homework. She poured her energy into something good, hoping it might heal the guilt inside her. She also continued therapy and worked on her self-control and self-awareness. Mr. Evans tried to talk to her again, perhaps to reconcile or to see if she was still open to his advances, but she rejected him firmly. She made it clear that her only goal at work now was to do her job professionally and nothing more. As the final court date for the divorce drew closer, Lisa's anxiety soared. She knew that once the divorce was finalized, she could no longer call Grant her husband. She would be alone, bearing the weight of her mistakes. Yet she tried not to turn back to despair. She had taken steps to improve herself. She had accepted responsibility. Her nights were still long and sad, but she held on to a sliver of hope that maybe someday she could rebuild her life in a better way. On the day of the hearing, she dressed in a plain black outfit. She waited outside the courtroom, her heart pounding. Grant arrived with his lawyer, looking tired and withdrawn. He walked past her without a greeting, and her stomach twisted. She could see the pain etched on his face. She could see the bitterness in his eyes. Inside, the judge looked over the case. There was no contest, no property battles, no children to fight over. Everything was clear on paper. The judge just needed to confirm that both parties consented to the divorce. Lisa swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. She had no right to refuse if Grant wanted this. She told him through her letter and her messages that she would respect his choice. The judge turned to Grant. "Do you have anything to add before we finalize the divorce?" Grant stood. His eyes flickered toward Lisa, then dropped to the floor. He cleared his throat. He hesitated. The moment stretched out, silent and tense. Lisa could feel her pulse hammering in her ears. He looked at the judge, then back at Lisa. He spoke slowly. Lisa wrote me a letter. In it, she apologized for everything. She's been going to therapy. She's volunteering. She hasn't asked me to forgive her right away, but she's trying to become a better person. Lisa felt the first tear roll down her cheek. She did not move or speak. She could only wait for him to continue. Grant took a shaky breath. I was hurt. I am hurt. I'm angry. I keep seeing that night over and over. But I also remember the woman I fell in love with, the one who would bring soup to our elderly neighbor, who would make me laugh at my worst moments, who listened to me when no one else would. He paused, his voice quivering. I don't know if I can trust her again right now. But I also know I can't throw away the life we built without giving it one last chance. The judge looked at him thoughtfully. Are you saying you do not wish to continue with this divorce? Grant swallowed, his hands trembling. I want to pause the proceedings. I want to see if we can rebuild what we lost. If that's even possible. Lisa let out a sob, her hand flying up to her mouth. She felt a wave of relief, gratitude, and heartbreak wash over her. She understood that this was not a guarantee they would make it, but it was a chance she had not dared to hope for. After a brief discussion, the judge agreed to give him time. They could revisit the divorce later if they wished, but for now, the case was put on hold. Lisa stood outside the courtroom, feeling the world spin around her. She was light-headed from the rush of emotions. Grant walked out shortly afterward. He faced her, and for a moment they just stared at each other. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice cracked from crying. I know it will take more than words. I'll do anything. Grant took a deep breath. I'm not sure how to forgive you yet, but maybe we can go to therapy together. Maybe we can talk without lawyers in the room. Lisa nodded, tears still streaming. She would do anything to fix her mistakes. I understand, she said gently, and I'm willing to try. But if you decide later that you can't stay with me, I'll respect that. He looked at her sadly, eyes full of both pain and a flicker of hope. I know, he said. Then, in a gesture that surprised her, he reached out and held her hand. It was a small sign of closeness. They walked away from the courthouse with no grand promises, just a fragile understanding that maybe they could begin again. Over the next few weeks, they met with a couples therapist. Grant insisted on living apart for a while, and Lisa agreed. They needed to rebuild trust from the ground up, and that could not be rushed. She continued her personal therapy, and Grant faced his own feelings of anger and betrayal. Their sessions were full of tears and confessions. Sometimes, Grant would storm out in frustration, overwhelmed by the memories of the betrayal. But each time, he would return calmer, ready to keep talking. Slowly, the cold wall between them started to melt. Lisa learned to be honest about why she had been so easily swayed by her boss's attention. Grant shared how lonely he had felt when she was consumed by work. They discovered they had ignored each other's emotional needs for far too long. One evening, Lisa invited Grant to meet her at the community center where she volunteered. He watched her help a group of children with spelling lessons. She was patient and encouraging, handing out stickers for good attempts, not just correct answers. The children adored her, and she glowed with genuine warmth. As Grant observed her, he remembered how compassionate she was when they first fell in love. After the session, they walked to a small cafe nearby. It was raining lightly, so the streets were quiet. Grant bought them 2 cups of hot chocolate. They sat at a corner table, the soft yellow light illuminating their tired faces. Thank you for coming, Lisa said. Grant nodded. Thank you for showing me this part of your life. I can see how hard you're working to be different. Lisa took a sip, looking down at her cup. I'm working on myself, she whispered. I know it might take years for you to trust me again, but I want to keep trying. They shared a silence that felt heavy yet calm. Outside, the rain tapped on the windows. Then Grant reached across the table and placed his hand on hers. It was warm and comforting. I appreciate that, he said. I'm still hurt, Lisa. I won't pretend otherwise. But seeing you here, I remember the good times. If you're willing to keep going, I am too. She managed a small, tremulous smile. "I am," she said, her voice full of sincerity. Over the next months, they took small steps back into each other's lives. They attended marriage counseling and learned to communicate better. Lisa left her position under Mr. Evans and moved to a different department in the same firm. She wanted to remove herself from any temptations or reminders. It was a difficult transition, but she believed it was necessary for her healing and for Grant's peace of mind. Grant started picking her up from work once a week, and they would go out for a casual dinner or a stroll in the park. They laughed about little things. They shared updates about their day. They remembered why they had chosen each other in the first place. With time, Grant's anger softened. He still had moments where he would look at her, and she could see the ghost of doubt in his eyes. But he was making a conscious effort to forgive. Lisa, for her part, never tried to rush him. She accepted that the pain she caused ran deep. She stayed committed to her personal growth. She also tried to show Grant, day by day, that she had changed. She was faithful in every sense of the word, never lying about where she went or who she was with. She learned to find self-worth in healthy ways, through helping others, through honest hard work, and through loving acts of kindness. One bright morning, nearly a year after the fateful office party, they decided to take a short trip to a quiet lakeside cabin. It was the same cabin they had visited during their honeymoon. They walked along the water, talking about memories. They watched the sun set over the rippling lake, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. For the first time in a long while, they both felt a sense of peace. On their last night there, sitting by the fireplace, Grant turned to Lisa and said, "I've been thinking about something. We never finalized the divorce, but I haven't said anything definite about our future. I just want you to know, I'm ready to try this again. Really try. No more living apart." Tears welled in Lisa's eyes. She breathed in shakily. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "I won't say I've forgotten what happened, and I won't say it's been easy. But I see the person you've become. I remember the person you were. I see how hard you've worked to make up for your mistakes. We both made errors in our relationship, ignoring each other's needs. I want us to rebuild our marriage. Together." Lisa let out a soft cry, partly from relief and partly from overwhelming joy. She fell into his arms, and they held each other close. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. It was quiet and tender, but it meant everything to them. In that embrace, they felt the promise of a new start. Back in the city, they withdrew the divorce papers officially. They moved back in together, taking it slowly, step by step. Their marriage was not magically perfect. They still had arguments, and shadows of the past would sometimes reappear. But every day, they chose to be open and honest. They spoke about their worries instead of burying them. They worked on trust by sharing calendars, texting each other when they would be late, and checking in with a loving tone, not suspicion. When Lisa finally felt stable in her new department, she approached her boss with an idea for a volunteer program that the company could sponsor at the community center. She wanted to use her marketing skills to bring attention to the needs of underprivileged children. The plan was a success, and it brought positive recognition to the firm. More important, it gave Lisa a sense of purpose that was healthy and good. Grant, too, found new energy. He started taking evening classes to become an electrician, a field he had always been curious about but never pursued. Lisa encouraged him, reminding him that he was intelligent, resourceful, and more than capable of handling a bigger career challenge. Their growth was mutual. Every step forward they took was a testament to the strength they had found in themselves and in each other. Their story became one of rebuilding and redemption, rather than just betrayal and heartbreak. And so, their journey led them to a place they never thought possible on the night Grant discovered his wife's betrayal. Through sincere effort, genuine remorse, and patient, steady love, they reached a point where they could look at each other without the weight of that memory crushing them. Instead, they saw the promise of a future that, while not free of obstacles, was filled with the resolve to face problems together. In the end, they learned that love can survive terrible mistakes if both people are willing to put in the work to heal. That evening by the lake, with the sun sinking into the water, was not a fairy tale ending. It was a real moment of forgiveness and hope. Their life continued with ups and downs, good days and tough days. But one thing was certain, they were in it together. Grant and Lisa found a path back to each other's hearts, and their love, although scarred, was reborn through honesty and perseverance. Neither of them took their marriage for granted anymore. This time, it was a shared promise. They would treasure every second, because they knew how quickly it all could shatter. Their story, which began with a nightmare in an office restroom, did not end there. It continued with a renewed vow to stay by each other's side, facing the future arm in arm. For some, this might sound unbelievable or too hopeful. But for Grant and Lisa, it was simply the next step in a long journey, one they chose to walk together day after day, heart to heart, stronger than ever before.